So today's afternoon assignment is going to be the self-reliance syntax exercise. So if we take a look at the third 9 weeks big picture, we'll see that this exercise, this lesson, falls within the first part of week 7. So remember, we talked about the big question or the big idea for the third 9 weeks being the search for an ideal world. So we have now moved past Julius Caesar into our study of transcendentalism, and we're going to be looking at self reliance. So, before this activity, before this lesson, students already completed lessons and activities that dealt with self reliance, and they have already read and annotated excerpts from Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self Reliance. This is the excerpt, this is the text that is found within our Canvas folder. And so your students will have this already, and it will be annotated for this next activity that we are going to complete. So let's take a look at the lesson. Again, just like all our lessons, we have teacher notes at the beginning, and again, this will be found within our Canvas folder. So we have our blurb that talks about the lesson. We have our materials and resources, and I would like us to take notice of the teacher's suggestions for this lesson. So again, take a look at our teacher suggestion, and if you'll notice, this says that the lesson can be challenging for students, so be prepared to actively guide engaged students as you follow along. So remember that one of our Marzano elements for the third 9 weeks was informally assessing students. And so we want to make certain that we are guiding our students through this lesson, engaging their understanding as we move along. One thing that is very significant to ensure the success of this lesson is for the teacher to preview the lesson and make certain that you identify any tier 3 or content specific vocabulary. So as this lesson deals with syntax, there are going to be terms that our students might not be very familiar with before the lesson. However, for those of you that have been following along with DGP, those students are going to be a little more successful with this, as these are the terms or some of the terms that they look at weekly. So consider that before moving into this lesson. So then we have our activity listed, and we have step-by-step directions. So for the first part of this activity, we're going to ask the students to analyze the syntax of Emerson's self-reliance essay. Students, again, have already read and annotated the passage. However, they might not have looked at syntax just yet. And so you want to make certain that they have an opportunity to do that before you begin the lesson. So then you're going to give the students the syntax handout and work through the questions for Excerpt A and B with the students in order to provide that scaffold to make certain that they are successful. For our purposes, we are going to look at Excerpt A together, and then for your afternoon work, you are going to look at excerpts B, C, and D within small groups in order to complete those. So let's look at Excerpt A. So our directions for the assignment says to read the sentences from each excerpt and answer the questions that follow to determine how Emerson's sentence constructions reinforce his argument about the importance of self-reliance. So we have our excerpt here from Self-Reliance. So we have Excerpt A. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself, for better, for worse, as his portion, that though his wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. So question number 1, and remember, we're looking at syntax. So question number 1, look at the underlined clauses, write the independent clause that is underlined. So we have our clauses underlined here at the very beginning of the excerpt, and we want to make certain that students see that there is a time in every man's education is the independent clause because it can stand alone. So if your students are having a tough time understanding the difference between independent and dependent, make certain that they understand that could be a complete sentence. Number 2, below, write the dependent clause that is underlined when he arrives at the conviction. So that is dependent upon the independent clause to make it a complete sentence. It cannot stand alone. Number 3, we're going to look at the highlighted clauses. That envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, and we're going to analyze the syntax within these clauses in parts A, B, and C here. So take just a second and look at the directions for A, B, and C, and then look at our answers here. So after you've taken just a second to look at our questions for A, B, and C, and then so after you've taken just a second to look at questions A, B, and C and the answers which we are looking for, think about whether or not your students might have some issues with these questions. Have you looked at parallel structure in class? Is sentence length something that you ask students to pay attention to? What about the effect of the length? So think about how you can pull these ideas into your informal assessments of students as you are moving through a variety of texts. Make sure that you are paying attention to these ideas in our reading of self-reliance and text beforehand. And then question number 4. Excerpt A contains a series of noun clauses that are connected by semicolons, each beginning with the word that. Writers use semicolons to join 2 or more independent clauses or to clarify a list of items. Below, paraphrase the list of convictions or beliefs that Emerson states individuals learn as they mature. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction. And so we're going back to our exercises that we have completed in the past 9 weeks, where we are asking students to paraphrase or to put in their own words. And so these are some examples of paraphrases for our clauses that occur in the excerpt. So take a second just to become familiar with those. And then let's look at question number 5. What is the effect of having Emerson's series of reasons connected by semicolons? What would happen to the effect of the sentence if Emerson's thoughts were separated by periods or connected by the word and? So take a look at our response. Think about whether or not you're asking students to look at these ideas in the text that you have read beforehand. Make certain that this is something that you'll pay attention to throughout the reading of a variety of texts so that students can feel comfortable with an analysis of syntax as you are moving forward. All right. So now that we've looked at Excerpt A together, you are going to be working in small groups in order to collaborate on excerpts B, C, and D. And so you're going to be assigned an excerpt, whether it's B, C, or D, and then you are going to work collaboratively within a doc in order to have answers to all of the responses in order to take back with you. So as you're working through, make certain that you let us know if there are any questions as you're moving through this task. And let's get to analyzing syntax.